Salam world, I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're doing the second Lion King installment, Simba's Pride. So, you know how in the Lion King video I said that the ending didn't resolve any of Simba's issues? Well, we definitely see Simba's issues shine through in this movie. This sequel to The Lion King actually focuses on Simba's daughter, Kiara, but acts as a continuation for Simba's story arc. Through ruling and parenting, he learns a lot about his own prejudices from unresolved emotions, which end up influencing his judgment. And it's his daughter and her secret lover who help him through this. So we finally get Simba's resolve here. Remind you of the plot of any other Shakespeare classic? Of course, Romeo and Juliet. So let's talk about it. But if you're only here for the movie review, you can click on the time shown on the screen right now or the timestamp in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. So we start with celebrating the birth of Simba and Nala's daughter Kiara, with Mufasa watching from above. And as Kiara grows, the more protective Simba becomes, suffocatingly so. Consequently, Kiara starts to rebel. Like father, like daughter, I guess. And they're not my words.
She's just like you were when you were young.
Exactly.
So she ends up leaving the boundaries of the Pride Lands. Like father, like daughter, and meets the son of an exiled lioness, Kovu. And this is where we get to see the aftermath of the previous movie. The lionesses, which actually liked Scar, didn't pledge their allegiance to Simba, and consequently they got exiled out of the Pride Lands. With harsher conditions and less available food, they definitely had a vendetta out for Simba for doing this to them. Now, although Kovu isn't Scar's biological child, he was his designated successor, which makes Kovu precious for the outcast lionesses and their kin. So the meeting between the two prodigies well, it was a little tense. As Simba's lecturing Kiara on Zira was plotting to kill Simba with a long-winded plan to brainwash Kovu to butter up to Kiara and then get close enough to pounce on her father, which actually works until Kovu falls in love with Kiara after an arranged date by Mufasa. So now Kovu be trying not to kill Simba, which is seen as betrayal by Zira, and so they take matters into their own hand. Unfortunately for Kovu and Kiara, the cat's out of the bag about Kovu's involvement, and so without trial, Simba exiles Kovu from the Pride Lands. And this is where we get outright war. But Romeo and Juliet got this covered. And the end we always wanted from Shakespeare tragedy actually happens. The pair jump into the feud, end the segregation, and unite all the lionesses with the catchphrase,
"We are one."
So the similarities with Romeo and Juliet are the Montagues and the Capulets. A Friar Lawrence who sees the bond between the two as the end of the hostilities, Mauricio's accidental and rash death, Romeo is banished from Verona for disobeying the authority, and the families are united by the love of the two children. Differences: there's no murder, no fake deaths, no suicide, and no balcony. Unless you count this. But at the end, the moral outcome of the two stories are basically the same. And it's the setup at the end of the original Lion King which lent itself for a slightly altered version of Romeo and Juliet to be the inspiration of the sequel. Now, this movie isn't as popular as the original, not because that it's bad, But the original is so much better. The animation of the original is more finesse, the characters are more fleshed out, and the emotions just hit harder. But as a Disney sequel, this is one of the better ones, because it actually deals with the aftermath of the original movie and doesn't just make a new story with new characters exploiting the audience of the original. But to understand Simba's progression in this movie, we really need to pick up from where we left off with movie 1. So if you haven't seen the OG Lion King analysis, I'd recommend watching that before getting into this video. The movie starts off with this song. He lives in you. And if you would have heard the song outside the context of this movie, you'd probably have thought this was a church choir singing about God and the Holy Spirit. Well, at least I did. Now, this links back to the concept that we introduced in the previous video, about Mufasa being Simba's goal and highest priority. For a young child, parents hold all the authority, even above God if you're religious. And that's because a parent is a child's provider, protector, carer, and their eyes into the world. As the child grows up and forms their own thoughts and opinions, the role of a parent in their life changes into friendship, mentorship, a guide, bodyguard, you name it. It all depends on how the child-parent relationship shapes up. But Simba lost his father at a very young age. That age where he was everything to him. And so Simba holds Mufasa at that grandiose mythic status, a godlike status. He aims to impress his father, live up to his father's standard, do right by him, and atone for his mistake of leaving the Pride Lands. Now, all these feelings are a consequence of Simba's unhealed grief, as well as a lack of a positive role model in his adolescence to help him grow into a confident young man. And this projects into Simba's parenting and ruling. From a parenting standpoint, he is trying to give Kiara everything that he didn't have, without even considering whether she wants it or needs it. I mean, we can see that she doesn't want to be whipped into shape for leadership, she doesn't want to stay within the vicinity of Pride Rock and the Pride Lands, and she doesn't want her father to be there all the time and make sure that she's alright. But these are the things that Simba wanted. He wished that his father was with him all the time. He wished that he'd never been forced to leave the Pride Lands, and he wished that he had been prepared for kinghood, rather than being thrown into it and expected to know what to do. Which gets us to his ruling. Unfortunately, Simba doesn't make all his decisions based on rational thinking. He lets his emotions get in the way. A prime example of this is his hate for the outsiders. Now, no one can blame Simba for not being able to act politically after overthrowing Scar. I mean, he doesn't know how to. And Zira saw Simba's reclamation of the throne as a threat to the power that she had been promised by Scar through her son Kovu being titled as Scar's successor. So of course there was a conflict of interest here. But this could have been solved diplomatically. Instead, the solution which was settled on only increased the tensions between the groups, which ended up dividing the pride and leading to prejudices on both sides. On Zira's side of things, Simba had just displaced her from her home, left her without protection as a single mother of 3 cubs, and condemned her to live her life in a place with little food, little water, and without the ability to reconcile or have access to the necessities for survival, whilst affording those basic rights to other animals and not family. Of course, this led to A, her hating Simba's guts and blaming him for her condition, and B, a superiority complex, given that she had managed to survive in these conditions, raise her cubs, and also lead a pride. This makes Zira's motivations both revenge and survival. On the other hand, with Simba, he has a fear of betrayal, which is a consequence of everything which happened with his uncle, as well as a lack of confidence in the role that he's been put into. Funnily enough, to circumvent the whole issue of betrayal, he ends up repeating history and acting the same way his uncle did. Scar felt betrayed by his brother for the birth of Simba, and so he did something about it. An important part of what he did was to get rid of the heir of the previous king. And even if it was unintentional, the method selected was
exile!
No!
Scar thought that Simba was dead, so he never worried about him coming back. But Simba, on the other hand, didn't intend to kill, and so always needed to look over his shoulder to make sure that he won't get attacked. But if you have a decent excuse for yourself to do something about it, then you can justify holding on to their basic rights in the name of making sure that they do not get strong enough to defeat you. And that excuse being de-lionizing them.
But they...
Them? Us. Look at them. They are us. What differences do you see?
By pitching them as the bad guy no matter what, even the kids that didn't even know Scar, well, you've built quite the story and quite the prejudice. Now, one may argue, but Zero's gonna brainwash the kids to hate Simba, and so he really is in trouble and has a right to be so harsh. And I say, well, that was the same logic used by the world about Muslims after 9/11. It was the same logic the Europeans used about Jews before the Holocaust. And it's the same logic used by many people around the world to live comfortably at the expense of the basic rights of other humans. Fear is paralyzing, and fear breeds conflict, depending on how you respond to it. Now, me, I'm on Kiara's side. It's okay to be scared and to tread with caution, but that caution shouldn't stop you from being humane. At the end of the day, every person can be somehow connected to someone very, very bad through race, gender, culture, ideology, age group, or interest. But that does not make them a bad person. Each person should be evaluated as an individual, not a member of a group, because that's just blatantly unfair. And even though Simba tries to step away from his prejudice via the advice of Nala, at the first sign of trouble, he buckles back. It reminds me a lot of the hairbrush scene from The Hate You Give. Now, that movie itself is a bit too forward for me, but the hairbrush scene, yeah, I mean, it hits different because it allows you to see what's happening in the minds of both Star and Haley. Both are hurt by the paranoia formed by prejudice. Both have lost their ability to see the good in others' intentions because of the aftermath of a tragedy. And tragedies affect each person in a different way. And because we use our experiences to learn from, we use experiences to make judgment, like learning from our mistakes. But judgment leads to compartmentalization, list checking. We end up putting people in boxes and treating these boxes differently. And in the second Lion King, both Kovu and Kiara are subject to boxing from both Zira and Simba, not just one side. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? Well, it depends on your filing system. If we use appearance or group identity as a box marker, then that's bad. If we use their demeanor and actions, that's a bit better, but it's not enough. We need to audit these boxes frequently. If someone made a bad impression once, we can't put them in a box and leave that box to collect dust. Being open to second chances and revisiting old files to amend judgments is actually a really good thing. I mean, we should have red lines, but those red lines should be built on our logic and experience, not news and history. Because One man's experience and logic shouldn't shape our own. And at the end, this is what Kiara and Kovu prove. The past is the past, but these lionesses standing in front of you, they just want a future. They don't want to feel undeserving of a decent meal or water to quench their thirst. They don't want to feel hated by their kinsmen and those living in a place that they were born in. They want the right to live like all other lionesses. So this movie ends up resolving one issue, the aftermath of the first movie. But does it resolve Simba's daddy issues? Well, maybe. I think the movie implies a resolution with Simba marrying Kiara to Kovu, but we'll never actually get to see it. And I think this highlights a reality, which is things take time to heal and that there are stages and obstacles in that journey. At the end of it all, it will leave a scar, ironically, as a reminder of that growth. We don't need to see Simba getting over what had happened, but how to cope with it in a healthy manner. And one step that we see Simba take is starting a new kingdom. He integrates the outsiders back into his pride and makes Kovu and Kiara the next in line in the throne, which could be seen and is definitely presented as progress. And then we see Mufasa, Simba's authority, approving this decision, which confirms that this idea came from Simba himself, meaning that he is now gaining confidence in his leadership abilities. Now, I am well aware that there is the Lion Guard, a series which takes place between the events of movie 1 and movie 2. And I also know that many of the characters of today's story crop up in the Lion Guard. Of course, Simba, Nala, and Kiara being the parents and the sisters of the main character Kion, but as well as Scar in the form of a spirit, Zira, Nuka, Vitani, and Kovu. The story of the Lion Guard adds too many loose threads and questions into the mix, so I've ignored its existence in this analysis, which I think is the most authentic way of doing this movie justice, given that the movie came out 4 years after the original Lion King and the Lion Guard came out 22 years later. So technically it wasn't in the picture when the writers were making this movie. But of course, when adding the lore given in the Lion Guard, it changes a few things here and there in the analysis. So when it comes to this new Mufasa movie, we're left guessing as to what route the writers are going to take. Is it going with the elements of Mufasa and Scar's childhood that we find out in the Lion Guard? Who knows? I guess we'll just find out at Christmas this year. I like this movie as a sequel to The Lion King. It holds onto the message of family, but expands on it to encompass the entire species, which is a nice introduction to young children about inclusion and treating everyone equally. Unfortunately, the animation is lacking compared to the OG Lion King, but I still like the music and the story, particularly the We Are One musical sequence. It's just really cute. Again, for anyone who's concerned with the romantic plot, Rafiki's involvement and the song Upendi could be viewed as problematic. The protagonists do get set up for the sake of fixing the divide between Simba's pride and the outsiders. But it's established beforehand that Kiara has feelings for Kovu, and that there is good in Kovu despite the brainwashing, so an organic romance could have formed regardless, but the movie doesn't choose the best way of dealing with it. Skipping the love sequence would make it look like that after a day of fun, Kiara has fallen for Kovu, and Kovu has rethought the whole revenge against Simba thing, and wants to do the right thing, which I like as a plot. Kinda wish they would have gone with that, to be honest. But anyways, there is another love song later on in the movie called Love Will Find a Way. It's a lot tamer and subtler than Upendi and Can You Feel the Love Tonight from the original Lion King movie, but for full transparency, I've got to mention that it's there. I personally think I would have enjoyed this movie a lot more if Kovu and Simba's inner conflicts were fleshed out more as they start to change their minds with regards to one another, and a more organically grown relationship between Kiara and Kovu. But the story does do well in fostering the tension, hate, and fear between some of the characters, as well as the innocence and purity in other characters to create this conflict and resolution really well. So that's Lion King Part 2, Simba's Pride. If you want to watch this movie, please make sure to use a streaming platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights and the spread of negativity in the world. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe and share it with other Lion King enthusiasts. We'll have some new content coming next week, so be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.